Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. In a major development, the value of dollar against the Pakistani rupee continues to increase, and it has touched the record high, crossing the barrier of 300 rupees. What are the immediate reasons in the depreciation of the value of Pakistani rupee against the greenback? We'll be taking up this for discussion in today's show. Also, we know the caretaker Prime Minister, Mr. Anwarul Haqqaq, while taking the reins of the government of the caretaker setup, also said that the caretaker government is going to follow the policies of the previous coalition government. Also, we'll be talking what steps are required in order to stabilize the country's economy, given the fact that Pakistan was able to get the standby agreement from the IMF after tough negotiations. To discuss all this, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Nasir Iqbal. He is head Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Dr. Iqbal, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are being joined by Mr. Tariq Yousuf. He's President, Karachi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He hasn't joined us for now. We'll be connecting with him later in the show. Let's start with the discussion of the rupee's value depreciating against the greenback. What immediate reasons, Dr. Iqbal, do you think are associated with that?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking this very important issue of depreciation. And if you look into the market perception about the dollar rate, it's around 300 plus, and in the interbank it's around 290, and in open market more than 300. What are the fundamental problem with the rupee and the dollar is like, if you look into the data, the basic issue is, on the one hand, there is a significant decrease in the exports. So this is the first reason that limiting our export. The second reason is the remittances. As we are aware that one of the key component of our balance of payment is support from the people who are living abroad. So the remittances is declined consistently over the last few months. So this is led to another issue that give uncertainty in the foreign exchange market. The third reason that maybe like the main reason apart from these two fundamental reasons would be the flow of this dollar to Afghan. So that also lead to some sort of outflow without knowing the numbers what actually is flowing there. So these are the three factors to me are the most important that really contribute toward with this uncertainty in the foreign exchange market.
Right, Dr. Iqbal, when you talk about this particular flow of dollars to the Afghan side, so that comes under the ambit of smuggling, right? So what sort of ideal measures do you think the authorities in Pakistan need to take in order to curb that particular phenomenon?
I think the like if we really looking for some sort of a quick solution, the one is we have to look into the permanent or credible policy measure that would give some sort of a leverage to investor that they start looking into the investment. Also, it gives some boost to the export sector. Secondly, the political setup would be the key in terms of, as you mentioned, that if we really have to engage with the Afghan to curtail this smuggling, we have to engage at the state level. So by looking the role of the state would be key in terms of determining the relationship between these two countries, and also looking into the informal trade that is occurring across the border. So the role of state is key in terms of defining how we can engage with the Afghan.
So how can the Afghan side, the interim Afghan authorities, be engaged in this particular regard, especially when it comes to combating the smuggling of the dollars and the foreign currency going beyond the border?
Yeah, I think there are international laws that basically govern this smuggling issue. If you look into the past history of Pakistan, we were facing a lot of conditionality and criticism from the international community due to this smuggling, especially if you look into the history of this FATF. So that gives some sort of binding mechanism to stop these type of illegal transaction of the dollar across the border. So as know, there is a way that this Afghan government is acknowledged by the most of the international communities. So we should engage the international communities while dealing with Afghanistan in terms of making sure that we can basically curtail the informal trade, and also to put some effective measure to decrease this outflow. We may not completely eliminate this outflow, but at least we can make some checks and balance on these outflows.
So what about hoarding locally? Are the dollars being hoarded locally also?
Yeah, of course. As I said, the market would play a key role in terms of deciding all these measures. So there is uncertainty in the market. So
why uncertainty? Because we know there was a much needed program that was required to stabilize the country's economy from the IMF. Finally, after tough negotiations, the Pakistani authorities were able to agree a standby agreement with the IMF of $3 billion for the next 9 months. So after having achieved that, why still the uncertainty prevails in the market?
When we talk about the IMF, our narrative is totally wrong. We believe that IMF is solution for us, and it is a political narrative that whenever we have a good deal with the IMF, we celebrate as a success. But it's totally a political narrative. If we look into the economic narrative of this whole debate, we have to think differently. The IMF is an injection that gives you some sort of breathing space when you are in an emergency. So look, this $3 billion loan from IMF that again will come in installment would give you two things. One, it will help you address a short-term balance of payment crisis. Secondly, it will give you some sort of hope that the other nation would believe that this country is on the right path. So this is the injection, and we take it as an injection, not as a solution. For solution, we have to think our own problems, and unless we realize that our problems are fundamental, and we have to take a very sustained and long-term measure to address those issues. And unless we don't agree on those solutions, this injection will give you only a short-term solution. That's what we have. For a month, the currency was stable, though it was not stable, but we can assume that it was stable. But now we are again back to the same crisis situation. So IMF never be a solution. It is an emergency ward. It is an emergency injection that gives you some sort of hope that you can take a credible measure in the long run that will help you come out of this crisis. And if we are looking for a solution, we have to devise our own strategy, our local solution, and we are not yet ready to work on those solutions.
Right. Talking specifically about this agreement, the standby agreement with the IMF, you already mentioned that it serves as a breathing space, already acknowledged by the authorities here in Pakistan also, when it gives the breathing space. So this breathing space was ideally for 9 months, right? The first tranche already been released. The second factor that is associated with it that you've just mentioned, it gives the confidence to other stakeholders also that the economy of the country is going to go on the right trajectory. But for at least that period of 9 months where that breathing space comes from the IMF, the uncertainty should have ended ideally, isn't it so?
No, it's not the truth. The loan period, the standby agreement is for 9 months. It doesn't mean that it gives you enough resources to meet your balance of payment needs. So there are two types of gaps. One is that you have to make this debt payment to international community on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a gap between your import and export. Over the last few months, Pakistan followed policy of this import restriction that gives some sort of help to reduce the gap, but it didn't completely cover those gaps. So if we look into the full need of the Pakistan, then probably you can see that the problem is much larger as compared what we are assuming that when we have this standby agreement with IMF that this $3 billion would help us to come out of this whole crisis. Our need is more than 3 times of these $3 billion. So how we can manage the remaining, if we need additional $10 billion over the next 9 months, how we can manage those? The solution, either we have to increase our export, or to reduce the import or to rely on the remittances or some sort of support from the friendly countries. So, yet we due to the IMF conditionality, we may not be able to impose a strict conditionality on the imports. We have to work on our export strategy, how we can increase our export strategy, how we can ensure that we can give them a right inputs with the competitive cost to make sure that our industrial sector would come up with some sort of export solution, and also how we can give some sort of confidence to the Pakistani, those are working outside of the country, so they can actually send some remittances to us, because the lack of confidence due to this uncertainty in the country, you know, on the uncertainty part there are two important things. On the dollar side, though, this IMF package would give some sort of certainty to the international community in terms of dealing with us, not addressing our problem, but dealing with us, how we can manage some sort of these debt. On the other hand, you know, there is the political instability, political uncertainty in the country, and yet despite the end of this government, we are even don't know when to the next election. That give a wrong signal to the people, like if we are uncertain about the next government, how we can say that the policies would be consistent. If we really want to attract some like remittances from these people, we have to give them a confidence that the Pakistan government would be with them, policies are consistent. For that, to me, the first and prime responsibility of this caretaker government is to announce the election date, whatever the date. We are not asking that it will be within 60 days.
There are certain limitations regarding that, because based on the new census, the new delimitations are going to be
we are not asking that the date would be within 2 months, date would be within 6 months, but whatever the date they assume that this much administrative work is required to actually conduct elections. So give them a date, that would be a fixed date, and everyone should focus on those lines, that this give some sort of message that the government is credible, they are working in the right direction, and they are looking for the solution. So that credibility is missing in terms of making decision.
Right. You earlier mentioned that imports need to be reduced, the dependency on imports, and exports likewise are needed to be increased. You already in your earlier view said that there was already a restriction on the imports during the previous government's tenure. So you mentioned that it produced the mixed results. So at the same time, you go on to say that imports must be reduced. So could you elaborate that?
You know, the previous government followed this policy to ban few imported goods, just to make sure that we can address to some extent this balance of payment crisis. But you know, with this the new standby agreement with the IMF, there is no such leverage to put such type of ban on these imported goods. So on that end, we have a very limited capacity to actually maneuver this import. So the only option that left with us is how we can increase our export within a quick time, and the government should have to work closely with the business community. They have to address their concern, what type of concern they have, like if they have a concern in terms of like adjustment in the export bills, like it took a lot of time to make clearance on the export side. The government ideally can reduce those transaction costs to make this export business friendly. So on that end, PIDE has done a lot of work. What are the basic problems our business sector is facing in terms of doing their businesses? So ideally, what this the current government can do is to reduce those transaction cost in terms of documentation, in terms of clearance, in terms of NOCs, and so many other documents those are needed to continue those business. So on that end, we can have some hope that these reforms would yield some dividend to address this balance of payment crisis, as well as to increase the reliance on
right. We've recently seen the previous government of the Pakistan Democratic Movement also established a special investment facilitation council. The number of areas regarding these transactions, reducing the transaction cost, do you think, because it's going to offer the one window operation, do you think that is going to address the problems that you've just mentioned, the Special Investment Facilitation Council?
If I blunt, my answer would be no. The reason I explain that, this like institution or the forum is basically to give a confidence to international investor that look, we have established another window that give a leverage to address your concern in terms of addressing all these documentation needs within the limited time. But look, the TOR and the mandate of this, that they primarily meant to attract a big investor from overseas to sell domestic assets, and for that could be for that the majority of these type of agreement would require a lot of time in terms of like if maybe some friendly countries from the GCC region would come over here and they start looking ideal assets that they can purchase in the coming month and year. So on that side they are good, but the other side they are not looking for the business of the country. So the export would depend on the how we can basically facilitate our business communities, and we are not asking to give them a much subsidy. Most of the time they are asking, but what we are arguing that give them a right platform. To right platform mean that give them easy access to all kind of facilities, like in term of making international transaction, in term of converting their rupee into dollar and dollar into rupee, and also the clearance process. These type of facilities would help the business communities to actually expand their export.
Right, you already mentioned that it's going to the Special Investment Facilitation Council is basically meant to attract the investment from abroad by providing a one window operation. I'll be taking a detailed view regarding that one also from you later in the show. For now, we are joined on the phone line by Mr. Tariq Yousuf. He is president of the Karachi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Tariq, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, we have seen the value of the dollar against the Pakistani rupee has touched the record high, breaking the barrier of 300 rupees. The immediate reasons, why do you think that continuous appreciation of the greenback against the PKR happens?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I think the appreciation of Pak rupee is not recent. We have been experiencing this for last 18 months almost now. Every day there has been a dip in the value of Pak rupees. We have to understand what the reason is. The basic reason is that we are not able to fetch dollars from exports from our foreign remittances. We are very excited this time because the figure is 300. We feel that it's a big number. But if you go 1.5 years back, it was like 150 rupees. So the fact of the matter is we have lost the value by 100%. And the excitement is only because of the number this time. We have to understand that in order to stop this depreciation of Pak rupee, what we can do, what are the reasons for this? And the reason, what I think, is that in Pakistan now the cost of doing things, which matters, of course, which is very important for exports, is not into consideration. We are increasing to meet our tax targets by increasing the prices as and when and where it is possible for the government, be it gas, be it electricity, be it petrol. All the basic necessities are on the rise. So if we do not take measures to improve upon this situation, to enable the exporter to compete with their counterparts in terms of prices and compete with the people who are in the region, then I think the drop, which has gone to a level of 10% almost every month, this situation shall remain like that until and unless some measures are taken to cut down the cost of manufacturing. Some measures are taken to give some incentive to our workers abroad to remit their money through the banking channel. And thirdly, what I feel in the recent past, because of the rapid increase now this time, we must realize that storage of dollars. I will use the word storage. People think that every week we can gain by 5-7 rupees. No business can give you 5 rupees or 7 rupees per week on an amount of 300 rupees, which is like 2%. 2% every week. That's a lot of money, and we must curtail this. We have to find a way of curtailing this tendency. All this is happening for last 1.5 years, as I said earlier. We are our exports, our political instability, our everyday new situation. This is a very bad situation. Thirdly, I want to tell you, we are known as country going towards bankruptcy. If you go to the common market, if a company is going into default, the people stop giving money to him. People stop believing him. People stop financing on him. All these reasons are further aggravating the situation. All these factors today, which are with the government of Pakistan and the people of Pakistan, are of course very damaging. And the dollar is rising because of all these reasons are.
Right, Mr. Tariq, you already mentioned about the dollar storage, and you also expect the government to, or the authorities to take sort of a measure, or in order to chalk out a way in order to deal with that. What ideal way the authorities could actually follow in order to deal with that particular thing?
You see, for example, in the recent budget, they have mentioned a facility for the agro-based industry only for those which are set up in the rural areas. So how do you expect to things that they will change overnight? We have to we have to understand that we have infrastructure problem, we have power problem, we have gas supplies problem. So all those factories which are already installed in all the major cities, why they should not be given such facilities that we can also look for those industries which are only for rural based, agro-based in a city like Karachi, I would say about Karachi. Why I cannot put up an agro processing plant in Karachi and have the benefits? There are so many areas that can be taken into consideration, and only textile is not the target of the world. We must look around. We must see how further we can develop to expand our exports.
Right, Mr. Tariq Yousuf, President of Karachi Chamber of Commerce and Industry, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for taking time out for this show tonight. We really appreciate that. On the phone line, we're joined now by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, a former advisor at the Ministry of Finance. Dr. Khaqan, thank you very much for your time for being with us tonight. The value of rupee against the greenback continues to depreciate continuously, especially despite the fact that the Pakistani authorities, after very tough negotiations, were able to get a standby agreement of $3 billion for next 9 months. So ideally, shouldn't there have been a certainty in the market that could have led to not that much of appreciation of greenback against the Pakistani rupee?
Jawad, what you've said is correct. However, there are certain elements in the short run which are also exerting pressure on the rupee, and that's why the downward slide. So let's have a look at them. Number one, Pakistan agreed with the IMF that it would open its imports. The kind of restrictions we had on the non-essential imports, as well as some restrictions on the essential imports, were lifted. The imports in the month of July went up. The current account deficit went up to $809 million. We were running a surplus before. What also happened simultaneously, because of the rupee parity being higher in the open market compared to the interbank, the remittances took a sharp decline in July, with about a 19% year-on-year drop in the month of July. So you can imagine that the supply of dollars kind of got restricted as the exports also were slower, the imports were rising, and the remittances were falling. So and the current account deficit is a manifestation of the numbers that I've just discussed with you. Considering that there was a pressure on the rupee, also there is a backlog of containers still held at the port when we had this kind of restriction on the imports. That is getting cleared. There is a backlog of dividends that the companies want to send abroad, the multinationals that work in Pakistan. There is a backlog of the royalties that companies want to send abroad. All this put together is putting pressure on the availability of dollars in the interbank market. But something that has happened, and I think that there is certain action by the authorities that may become necessary, is that we agreed with the IMF that Pakistan's interbank would not be different than 1.25% from the open market rate in 5 consecutive days on the average. Now, that means that once the open market slides, and that has also had a sliding trend, and which is increased or exacerbated because dollarization of the economy, I think, is still continuing in the sense people find more comfort in holding dollar as a store of value rather than holding the rupee. Simultaneously, we have moved some imports from the interbank to the open market, which is also putting some pressure there. And then, of course, there is more manipulation in the open market. Now, in my expert opinion, I think there is a need to go back to the fund and have a discussion on this matter, the dynamics of the open market, the way the open market operates, the size of the open market is 1/10 the size of the interbank or even smaller. The dynamics of the interbank, the way the interbank operates, it's more organized. And thirdly, the size is many a times the size of the open market. That market should not be chasing the interbank. The interbank market should not be chasing the open market. So that's something.
Right. Unfortunately, we've lost the connection with Dr. Khaqan. Najeeb will try to reconnect with him. Now, Dr. Iqbal, as Dr. Khaqan Najeeb was also mentioning a very important dimension, that IMF has set a condition that the difference between the value of the rupee and the greenback shouldn't be beyond 1.25% for the consecutive 5 business days. Don't you think when the IMF asks the government to lift that gap that was already imposed on the exchange rate by setting this particular limit on to the difference between the two currencies, IMF itself is interfering?
No, the answer is basically no. If we look into our own history, whenever we have a good flow of dollar, we try to control the market. The way that if we look into the trend of the previous government, they try to control this foreign exchange market by throwing dollar in the open market and keeping this the rupee dollar exchange rate artificially low. And that experience would basically compel or induce to IMF that they can put some sort of rule-based condition that we will not intervene in the foreign exchange market. To me, I think we should, to some extent, rather than going back to the IMF, we should start looking our own solution. If we at this point in time would go back to IMF and say that, look, we may not be able to manage our rupee, we may not be able to attract more dollar, we may not be able to address this crisis, we have to renegotiate. Suddenly they will they already don't have a trust on our the policy stability, then it might aggravate the overall discomfort between IMF and the government of Pakistan, because that like lack of trust between these two entities end up with that type of rigid conditions in terms of imposing some rules of business while dealing with all these crises. So, to me, rather than intervening in this, we have to look into the cost of doing business that the earlier the speaker mentioned in their point, that the cost of doing business is relatively high, and if we work on those lines, probably it will encourage the investor, it will encourage the business to increase the exports, rather than putting a ban, as Najeeb also mentioned, that there is a condition by the IMF that we may not be able to impose any conditionality on the import. So, the what leverage for us is to work on either to the remittances side, to give some sort of a good incentive to the people those are working in foreign countries to send money through formal channel. For that, we have to streamline the process and reduce the transaction cost through the formal channel. The secondly, we have to work with the business community, and we have to identify their basic needs in terms of easing the business, and that is not a big problem for the current government. He can deal very easily with these type of issues by looking into the documentation needs, looking into the way that export receipt become mature. If it took 90 days, it can be reduced up to 30 days. So, these type of solution would be ideal rather than going back to IMF.
Right, we are once again joined by Dr. Khaqan. Najeeb, Dr. Khaqan, you already mentioned there was a condition set by IMF. The difference between the two currencies for the 5 consecutive business days shouldn't be exceeding 1.25%. At the same time, we see that the IMF requires the government not to impose a cap that was already imposed. It was later on lifted by the government. Don't you think setting this particular limit at 1.25% of the difference between the rates of the two currencies is an intervention in itself? Unfortunately, we have lost the connection once again with Dr. Khaqan. Najeeb will try to reconnect with him on Skype. For now, we are joined by Mr. Tariq Yousuf, President, Karachi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Tariq, thank you once again for joining in. Now, the setting the limit of the difference between the rates of Pakistani rupee and the dollar by the IMF for 5 business days at 1.25%. What sense do you make of that?
Can you just, I couldn't hear you the last one. You said that.
The limit set by the IMF between the rates of PKR and the greenback at 1.25% for 5 consecutive business days. What does that mean to you?
I think they want that the dollar should be assessed at its real value, at the value it is in demand. That's why they want to have a 1.5% only for 5 days. But here in Pakistan, we have a situation that it has now become a very speculative market. And when you are in a speculative market, things are not the way you want them to move. There is so much of variation. You can see in the last 3 days, 14 rupees, 1.5% against 14 rupees is no match. This is a situation which really needs, we have not many problems in this case, in case of dollar value. So many controls, so many hindrances. The interest rate is also one factor. The dollar inflation is also one factor. Everything is going against the Pak rupee. With 21% interest rate on Pak rupee, people are just hedging their money wherever they find. I think Pakistan has to really work out a very strong export policy. Otherwise, it will not go the way they want it. Pakistan has problem of securing dollars. Pakistan has problem of getting the confidence of their supplier and buyer both. We have to know when the containers are stuck at port, the payment is not sent to the supplier. Then again, when we go back to him, he is not sure how much time they send the money. What will be the final cost of doing things? What will be the price of electricity next month? The NAPRA holds a meeting every 2 months, every month, and increases the price. There is a chaos sort of a situation, and all this is resulting in a poor value of Pak rupee. I think we have to really draw a line with consensus, with a think tank sort of a policy, how to make a line of action for to improve the exports from Pakistan, how to cut down the cost of doing things in Pakistan. We are just using this word cost of doing things, but actually it matters.
Right,
The
Mr.
price of
Tariq,
gas,
you
and
already
see,
mentioned a number of times increasing the exports of Pakistan. Where to start from in the immediate term?
I think they have to find a way for energy. There is a lot of pilferage in energy. Last week, 2 days ago, the Prime Minister was here, and I mentioned before him that if we cannot cut down the price officially, the tariff set by them, but at least we can minimize this price by controlling the pilferage, known as line losses. And it is in every source of energy like electricity and gas. Both these areas have their extreme line connections, line losses, which results into higher price. People who are not paying for electricity bill, they their bill is indirectly paid by those people who are actually paying the bill. Similarly is the situation with gas. There are some subsidies also on the gas. We 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 don't understand. I don't know why for last 2 years we are not able to design a system to control this. We are just taxing the common man and trying to gain our revenues
I'll take your detailed view.
instead of broadening the tax net.
How to establish a system in order to address this particular issue of the line losses, both, as you already mentioned, in electricity in particular, as also reducing the circular debt in the gas sector. Also, once again, we are joined by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Dr. Khaqan, you already mentioned the condition that has been set by IMF, or the difference between rupee's value and the greenback to be at 1.25%. For 5 consecutive business days. Don't you think it's an intervention itself, given the fact that IMF wants the government not to impose any sort of a cap?
So I think it's fine that Pakistan should not be intervening in the interbank market. We should not be trying to fix a value or give a direction to the interbank market. But I think this benchmark that has been set, the reason I think we need to go back is it's a continuous structural benchmark. The data that is available kind of shows that we may be in breach of the structural benchmark. The data also shows that we are continuously sliding because there is pressure to catch up and other pressures as well. And this may be a prudent way to have a discussion with the IMF on this. The other very important part in the immediate that Pakistan can do is to improve the inflows of dollars. I have consistently been saying this, that Pakistan is in a dollar liquidity crunch. In the short run, Pakistan has to overcome that dollar liquidity crunch.
Where do you, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, where do you identify those sources for Pakistan where it can increase the dollar inflows from?
Jawad, I'm really glad that you've asked that question, so we will answer that very, very categorically. In the short run, multilateral flows are your best source of cheap and easier money. Not easy money, but easier money. You pledged $9 billion, mostly by the multilaterals when you went to Geneva. Get your projects moving, that money coming in. We have a $750 million program loan called Rise 2 with the World Bank. Get that going. The third best source of financing right now, we gave back $3 to $5 billion. Let me repeat that for everyone. Pakistan gave back $3 to $5 billion when Pakistan's rating dropped and Pakistan's IMF program stalled. The commercial banks of the Middle Eastern countries took that money back from us and it was not refinanced. Whereas the Chinese commercials did refinance, the UAE and the Middle Eastern countries did not refinance the kind of monies that we paid back. Now is the time to go back to them under the umbrella of the IMF, start getting those flows. They will be a little more expensive, but the authorities right now who are in charge must do this immediately and issue a most important document for the next 3 months, which is to show that the next 3 months inflows to the country, inflows from multilaterals, inflows bilateral, inflows commercial, where are they going to come and what are the kind of inflows that we are looking at. At the same time, if they were to be more transparent and communicate to the market, they must also communicate to the market what are the outflows Pakistan is looking at and what is the kind of reserves build-up that one sees. Right now, if I share a figure with you, you will understand why I am saying this. The figure that has just come out on the State Bank reserves for a week, $125 million has been seen in the State Bank reserves, which has just come out as I talk to you. And that pushed Pakistan's reserves, which had gone well above $8 billion, to again $7.5 billion. Now, these are really the high-frequency indicators that are showing to us that there is an outflow happening. So I think the policy statement by the authorities has become really necessary here and would help. I am sure the smart folks at the Ministry of Finance are doing this work to kind of get a grip on these things and come up with this statement. The store of value, the dollarization, is also happening because people in the in the open market, and then there is a gray market also, where you don't have to give identity card and, which is operating. Those folks all feel that this slide may continue, and so they are holding on to either what they have or having excessive buying. So I think all these really need to be put together, and imports which are held or dividends which are held, if they are creating an excessive pressure right now, may need to be staggered another 3 months, again depending on what the inflows are. So this kind of serious work that needs to be done. On the remittance front, we did take some remittance measures. Remittance measures can also be where we may enhance the incentive of bringing in remittance, but the real difference will come when I am able to make sure that Pakistan's and Pakistan's open market do not have a 4.5% difference which they have today. So that IMF benchmark has become really kind of redundant, and that is why I say going to them and improving all our flows are important. Let me comment on two very other important issues that the speakers have rightly talked about. Number one, energy is a binding constraint on Pakistan's economic growth. We should have no doubt. The President KCCI is absolutely on the dot with this. But let me say this also. Usual business, conventional business of changing board or changing CEOs from within the companies, I think that has really, lost its value as we look at it. The constellation in the energy sector has to be agreed is not correct. What is that constellation today? Pakistan owns the Gencos, Pakistan owns the Discos, Pakistan owns the transmission. Pakistan buys electricity from UTPs at a 17% guaranteed rate of return in dollars. Pakistan sells that electricity at a loss because of losses, the lower collection. Now let's look at two other sectors that Pakistan did get right. It's easy to criticize that we didn't get, much right, but let me say, telecom sector, you deregulated it, you liberalized it, you privatized it. These are the three things that you need to do in every sector. What happened in the end? A market was created, a competitive market was created. The competition drove down the prices and the competition drove up the efficiency in these areas. Sometimes, Jawad, I come with you on the Skype and talking with you from Paris. But when I come to my Lahore home or Islamabad, I have the same kind of speed that I enjoy in Paris, whether I'm in Lahore or in Islamabad. What does that show to you? That markets work. What it shows to you is competition works. What it shows to you is efficiency is what we need to deliver on. Let me tell you another sector which pays a high amount of tax in this country, and it may not be the most efficient, but it is still largely 80% held by the private sector of Pakistan. Again, we got it right. We sold the banks, and there can be a disagreement on the way we did privatization, but today it's a big taxpayer. Today there is competition on credit cards. Today there is competition on the amount of profit they pay to you. So there's a healthy competitive market that was created. They are supposed to drive down the cost of doing business. You know, everyone in Pakistan talks about this cost of doing business. Let them, get their procedures right, draw this cost of doing business down. Absolutely right.
Well taken, Dr. Khaqan. Najeeb, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. Unfortunately, we're running short of time. I'll have to go to the other participants in the show also. Mr. Tariq, what's your understanding? Quick closing remarks regarding where do you identify in the immediate terms the sources of getting more dollar inflows in Pakistan?
I would just like to very shortly say, as Dr. Saab has mentioned, the inflow and outflow of dollars. Our problem is not the outflow. Our problem is inflow, to my understanding. We are not having an inflow in our reserves of the state bank. And for that, I've been repeatedly saying that very serious measures needs to be taken for the purpose of home remittance and for the purpose of to boost the export from Pakistan. If we do not do something about this, and repeatedly again, the cost of doing things, if we do not take a serious concern about these things.
It's a long-term solution, or in the immediate term, whatever the suggestions been put forth by Dr. Khaqan, Najeeb, getting the inflows from the multilaterals and the bilaterals. What's your understanding of that?
Yeah, definitely. I also understand that there are a lot of fundings available with different provincial governments from different world organizations. And we are not able to use those funds because of the non-availability of, I would say, not educating the people, no forum for that, no context for that. And that is also a way of bringing dollars into Pakistan, which are available with different governments for different funding. And that's also an easier way of
right, your point is taken. Dr. Iqbal, your last closing comment regarding where do you identify in the immediate term to get more dollar inflows in Pakistan?
I think there are two ways to get this, and that would be the easy. One is we should have to work on how we can roll over our debt. Two, we have to negotiate with multilateral and bilateral on the climate issue, because that is the main thing where we can get some sort of support, because over the last few years we are struggling with the climate change. But to make sure that these two channels would work, we have to work on two P's. One is the policy credibility or policy stability, and other is political stability. Unless we make sure that these two P works, we may not be able to get these inflows.
Dr. Nasir Iqbal, Head of Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight, joining us in the studio. On Skype, we were joined by Mr. Tariq Yousuf, President of Karachi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Tariq Yousuf, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. On the phone line, we were joined by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former Advisor, Ministry of Finance. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Khaqan. Also, it was an enlightening discussion, as always, with all of the participants. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves, and thank you for watching.